Psychedelics Today, a weekly podcast exploring the science and culture of the emerging psychedelic field with your hosts Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. Today on the show, I get to chat with Daniel Shankin of Tam Integration. I'll read a little bit of his bio here. After a profound and intense awakening experience in 1998, Daniel dove deep into his yoga and meditation practice to stabilize his realization in his body and the world. He began teaching in 2002 and took over leadership in his neighborhood yoga studio in 2004. He's directed several teacher training programs and taught on the faculty of even more. His work evolved into a coaching practice based on deep inquiry and the cultivation of clarity, resilience, and heart. With recognition that our true nature is vast and generous, wise, he strives to encourage his clients to find their own innate goodness and boundless strength. In 2018, he founded Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration, a community-based organization focused on approaching psychedelic preparation, integration as a true spiritual practice. Tam Integration offers circles, meditation classes, and one-on-one support throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. If you want to learn more about Daniel and his work, you can find him over at Sitaram Das, that's SITARAMDAS.com, or over at tamintegration.com as well. And so today on the show, we dive into a lot of different topics, from, how Daniel got involved in this work, and we chat a little bit about Groff's perinatal birth matrices and the birth process, and we also get to chat a little bit about this upcoming event that Daniel has put together and is hosting called the Psilocybin Summit, which is an awesome event that's coming up on September 20th to the 22nd. It's an online summit, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can sign up for this summit. It's a worldwide celebration of the myth, magic, and science of psychedelic mushrooms. It has an amazing lineup. There's about, 20 plus speakers, and covers a wide range of topics, including best practices, safe use, managing worst case scenarios, policy, reclassification for medical use, decriminalization efforts, leading edge research on psilocybin depression, cultivation talks, facilitating powerful experiences, and then also some tracks on traditional culture, ritual, and the practice of the Mazatec people and how they work with mushrooms. So, this online summit looks like it's going to cover a lot of different topics. Looks awesome. If you go to psilocybinsummit.com/sci today, you'll get 10% off, and it's also an affiliate link. So at no cost to you, we also get a little compensation. So if you want to check out this summit and also support Psychedelics Today and what we're doing here, psilocybinsummit.com/sci today, and you'll get 10% off of this summit. And again, that begins on September 20th and it goes to the 22nd. And I believe, I think you get lifetime access if you sign up. And I don't know, maybe I should check in with Daniel, but I'm almost positive if you're listening to this in the future and you're like, wow, I really want to sign up for this, I think you'll be able to sign up for it in the future. All this stuff is going to live online. They do have a sign up where you get lifetime access. So yeah, I believe that if you're listening to this in the future and you really want to check out this online summit with all the speakers, you can probably still sign up. And let's see, looks like it is going to start on, I'm on their schedule now, and it looks like the 19th, September 19th. It starts off with Bet Williams, and that talk begins at 4 p.m. And then, the 20th, the 22nd, and the 21st, 22nd. So, okay, maybe this starts on the 19th instead of the 20th. I remember chatting with Daniel, and he said, they just keep adding speakers and dates. So I'm sure the schedule will change, and, they'll probably still keep adding other speakers and topics. So definitely check that out. I'm excited about it. It looks like an awesome lineup, really cool topics. And yeah, I mean, if you just want to further your psychedelic education, this is definitely an event to check out. So again, if you want to check out this upcoming Psilocybin Summit, all based around psychedelic mushrooms, you can learn more at psilocybinsummit.com/Psy today, and you can get 10% off there. So I hope you enjoy this show with Daniel Shankin. I really enjoyed chatting with him. We've been in communication for a bit here and there, and yeah, I was excited to finally get him on the show and chat about integration and just what he's doing in the community here. And yeah, I'm really excited, as I mentioned already, this online summit. It looks awesome. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy this show, and we'll catch you on the other side. All right, welcome back to Psychedelics today, everybody. I have the pleasure of speaking with Daniel Shankin Sitaram from Tam Integration, founder of Tam Integration. They host psychedelic integration circles, and also in the educational space, you have a exciting upcoming summit that we're all excited about. Looks like you have an awesome lineup called the Psilocybin Summit. So yeah, welcome to the show, and yeah, we're excited to dig in today with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you for a ton of reasons.
Awesome. Do you want to do a little background and give the listeners just a little info about who you are and anything that I might have missed?
Oh, a little bit about me. I came up in the psychedelic space in the 90s. Just the recreational use kind of turned into therapeutic and transformational use, as it often does, right? Yeah. The medicines I guess I was using at the time was mostly LSD and psilocybin in, my teenage years. And then at about the time that I started kind of focusing on a yoga practice and reading spiritual books, it's almost like the medicine was like, oh, so you want to get enlightened, huh? You're going to have to do some shadow work. And they just started throwing material. I was kind of a grown up at that point. I was 18, 19, 20. And the transformational work started to happen. And there wasn't really integration communities that I knew of. There were probably some rarefied circles somewhere, right? Where the old heads were taking care of each other. But in sort of the Grateful Dead communities of Eugene, Oregon in 1998, that didn't really exist. And all we had were Ram Dass books.
Yeah.
Right. And that in the back of Be Here Now, there was a cookbook for a spiritual life, right? There's the 3 sections of the Ram Dass book. And Cookbook for a Spiritual Life could have also been called Integration for Dummies.
Yeah.
Integration for Hippies. And so I had this thought that we kind of know is true now, right? So like back then, there also weren't scientists putting wires on the heads of monks.
No, it's relatively new.
That's relatively new. And they're like, oh, there's something, people weren't exploring consciousness scientifically in the same way. And we had this sense that the experiences we were having were more real than our regular life.
Yeah.
And I had this sense that, oh, this is not a hallucination. This fact that I feel more deeply connected with my friends and strangers, and the fact that like I'm more loving and kind and have a deeper sense of purpose and meaning in my life, that, what we're doing here is important, and that I have a responsibility to change things for the better. Like all that stuff started to come up through these experiences. Right. And it's not uncommon, right, that we know, because we now are talking to each other. So Ram Dass said, if you want this to stay true, you have to do yoga and meditation. And so I was like, okay, I'll do yoga and meditation. And left the community for a little bit to kind of join the yoga world. And, did yoga practice, did yoga teacher trainings, owned a yoga studio, and did all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of working. And And those sorts of awarenesses were taking hold. And that's sort of like my heart was kind of growing in a stable and healthy way. And I circled back around. Have you had Dr. Nishay on your podcast yet?
Not yet. She's on our list, and we really need to get her on soon. I know that she was in like a lot of transitions and whatnot, so I don't know. We'll definitely reach out to her and get her on the show. She's been on the list for a while.
Well, she's brilliant, right? She's absolutely brilliant, and I met her at an Evolver Spore in like 2011 or 2012, and she was working on her PhD in psychedelic and visionary literature at Penn, and she said, "You're going to help me throw a psychedelic science conference." And up until that point, I had just, a psychedelic science conference to me sounded like it was going to be a bunch of people quoting Terence McKenna to each other. Right? Because that's all there was in the 90s. It's like everybody had like 2 Terence McKenna books, maybe The Psychedelic Experience by Metzger, and, some Alex Gray prints. Mm-hmm. That was all we had. And sure enough, she was like, well, no, they're doing research at Johns Hopkins and NYU, and there's these kind of people doing this, and there's this people doing this. And I was blown away. It was like, wow, look at what is here that hadn't been available to me before. And I also got turned on to the work of Catherine McLean, who is, and she was doing meditation. She was meditation, psilocybin, and positive personality change. And I was like, I knew it. It was going on. And so this was the first time that I had really heard of a scientist, a researcher, holding both of these two things that I had sort of held very dear, is that, this is the psychedelic experience and the meditation experience. And there was some sort of legitimacy to the fact that you can measure the fact that people became better people. Mm-hmm. And she was really big into integration. It was like, integration is important. And that's sort of where I first heard the term. And it had sort of been in the back of my head, and I started going to like a couple of circles, and experiences from 15 years ago were coming up to be resolved. Wow. Right? Things that were confusing or strange, or, it kind of maybe hid. I mean, you know how Inception works, psychedelic Inception, a weird little belief gets stuck in there. Yeah. And through the simple act of talking about it, you realize, oh, that's stupid. Like, I've been living my life based on, in some small part, some stupid idea, and it's been making things harder for me. And just hearing somebody else go through it, I often say it's kind of like, those old Western movies where everybody has like 1/5 of the map? Yeah. That's kind of like, it's like, that's the psychedelic experience in a lot of ways. And the integration circle is the process of everybody like putting their maps together. And so we learn so much by listening, and people also gain so much by being heard. Yes. I totally agree. And so there were a couple of integration circles in the Bay Area. Erie. I think you talked to Larry a couple of weeks ago, right? Yeah, we had him on to talk about decrim, and then we should get him on again to just talk about general stuff. We had him on our course to talk about integration. So we got an interview up there to talk about what he was doing with Erie and the integration circles that they were offering. Right. So Larry and Julie have done great work about, integration education and things like that. And they're kind of my heroes in a certain way as well. The only thing about them is that they're on the other side of the bay. For people who aren't familiar with Bay Area geography, there's sort of 3 sections. There's San Francisco, and then on the other side of the water is Oakland, and then on the other side of the water is Marin. And to get to one or another, you have to cross like an $8 bridge. And that's fine, but you don't always feel like crossing a bridge to go to integration circle. And the question became, why isn't there one in Marin? Somebody should do this. And, the old Zen koan is, well, you're somebody. It's like, oh shit, I guess I'm somebody. And so I started doing them here. Just so that, I had to imagine that if I didn't always want to cross the bridge, probably other people didn't want to either. And, this neighborhood has a rich psychedelic history anyway.
Yeah.
It's not like people aren't getting high in the North Bay.
Right.
So we should have a little home.
Yeah.
And so started working on that.
And Tam is the mountain around there, Mount Tam, is that correct? That's where you got the name from?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, we know the shamanic symbolism of mountains, right? And the idea of sort of, traveling up the mountain and traveling down, traveling up the world bridge to the upper worlds and the lower worlds, and having an access, that when we're in a psychedelic space, having an orientation is powerful. We often orient ourselves with an intention. We orient ourselves, on the land, by way of things like mountains, sunrises and sunsets. Yeah. The logo has the setting sun behind Mount Tam, as opposed to the rising sun, to sort of symbolize the completion and the ending of a journey well taken.
Right.
And yeah, so that's kind of me. Sort of that's one facet of me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Something you brought up just about not having a lot of people around in the 90s and this idea of integration circles and the importance of it. It just kind of reminds me of a little email I sent out, I think on Friday, just talking about the importance of psychedelic education and just this concept of integration. And, I was reflecting on psychedelics today as a whole, and this project, and kind of where it kind of stems from for myself, and why I believe this education is really important, and being able to take ownership and be like, oh, there's nothing happening here, and maybe I should start something to support others, because maybe people don't have access to go over the bridge and go into San Francisco, and who always wants to commute to places, and the importance about getting things locally done. And, the one thing that came up for me was thinking about when I was 16 and had my near-death experience. And that's been a whole integration process in itself. And I think that was probably the most psychedelic experience I've ever had. And I'm still, 16 years later, still trying to integrate those pieces, and not having a community or like a group of elders to help coach me through that process. I really found it on my own, and it really started with like Ram Dass, Be Here Now, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And then I kind of started stumbling across Terence McKenna and Stan Groff and all those. But just the importance of getting something started in your local community and supporting others. And I just think about that. My 16-year-old self, back then, not having the internet as it is now, and connecting with all these other folks and having all these resources. And it's like, there's people out there that need the support.
Fun. It's so funny. I hear you say that, not wanting to cross the bridge. And I'm imagining that there's somebody listening to this podcast in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska.
Right.
Thinking that I'm so spoiled.
Yeah.
That there are psychedelic societies within like a half-hour drive in any direction. And I just want one in my backyard.
Yeah. Well, middle of nowhere. It's like, then taking the long trek to New York, or to the city. I'm saying New York because that's the closest city to me. But going to trek an hour or so to a big city, it's a lot for people. Maybe people don't always have the resources for that.
Right. And there was one other thing that you were saying. I didn't even know about your near-death experience.
Yeah. Pretty pivotal life event.
Sure. I would imagine.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad I have you, because I was, I spent the week in the woods, at a retreat center, mostly in silence with my wife. And we've been reading baby books because we're expecting a baby.
Congrats. That's exciting.
Thank you. It is really exciting. And, it's interesting to think about how, how do you raise, the conscious child raising is really interesting. And I wanted to talk to you because you're one of the people that I know who is probably best well versed in the perinatal matrices, which you talk about in your course. Right? I listened to a bit of it in your integration online course.
Yeah.
Which I think is great. And I was reading a book about a woman who spent time with some indigenous tribes in South America. And these are shamanic tribes, and they use psychedelic medicine. She references them. She doesn't go into depth about their psychedelic use. She talks mostly about how they raise their babies.
Oh, interesting.
And I know that there's a lot of, everybody's really interested in how we're healing our childhood trauma with psychedelics, right? And even like Gabor Mate talks about how addiction is the opposite of connection and feeling disconnected and in our modern society and things like that. So we're all talking about how to heal, right? We're not necessarily talking about how to just raise ourselves so we need less healing.
Right.
And so my question is like, how do I raise a baby that has with as little trauma as possible? And some of this wisdom is in her book. Her book is almost like a continuation of Groff's perinatal matrices, right? Through, through the womb, right? Where the perinatal matrices sort of talk about life in the womb and then the birth process. But then Groff kind of stops once the baby's out.
Right.
Right. And so the continuum concept, this book by Gene Liedloff, which I think was published back in 1975. And it's a little dated. There's, she doesn't use PC terms everywhere. She refers to them as Stone Age Indians, right? Whereas we might say, indigenous people things like that. And there's a couple other quirky things in there. But the way she describes the trauma that an infant can go through reminded me a lot. I mean, I pictured H.R. Giger because I was introduced to the perinatal matrices through that really cool Groff Giger book. Yeah. Where, Groff talks about the matrices and the traumas, the pre-birth traumas, and then compares them to, these very kind of darkly visionary psychedelic art by Giger. And, says that, whereas the psychedelic art that most of us gravitate towards is like very positive and very light filled and, has a lot of like third eyes in it and things like that. And we're a little shy about the darkness in the Giger art and the creepiness of it. But but if we haven't seen that imagery in our psychedelic experiences, we probably aren't trying hard enough.
Right.
And the way that she describes what we consider to be normal as far as child rearing, like if you take a baby and put it in a sterile box in a room away from its parents, surrounded by other babies in boxes, right? That's, if you think about that from a baby's perspective that doesn't know anything about time, that doesn't know where its mother is, who has been designed, like the concept is the baby is basically designed to be held by the mother.
Right.
From birth until it's ready to crawl, until it doesn't want to anymore. It's basically supposed to be in the arms, knowing where its parents are, right? And to put that child in a box with other children in boxes away from their parents with nobody to care for them or pay attention to them in that cold, sterile environment, like that's a Gigerian hellscape. Right? You might as well be in like that scene. I mean, I feel like it's cheating to reference The Matrix.
Right.
But if you look at all of those people in all of those pods with nobody to care for them and nobody to love them, like how is that a good idea at all?
Right. Yeah. No connection, no nurturing, no. Yeah. It's very sterile. Right.
Mm-hmm. And and then going on with that is we then project our own antisocial tendencies onto babies. Right? There's like, people say like, oh, you can't, when the baby cries, you can't just give in to its whims. It's manipulating you.
Right.
It's like, what are you talking about? The thing is just designed to be held. Like that's how it knows everything's okay.
Yeah.
right? It's like taking a fish and putting it on the land and being like, oh, it just has to learn. Right? You're depriving it of what it needs the most.
Yeah.
And then you're wondering why it's like addicted and antisocial when it grows up.
It's almost like that lack of connection in the early stages, like kind of like really sets the tone later on. Yeah, it's super interesting. And to kind of go back to Groff, like, he definitely takes into account of, post-birth experiences. And I think he developed, he kind of takes in everything, but the Freudian kind of point of view or psychology at that point was like, tabula rasa. We're all born a blank slate and nothing is coming in. I think Otto Rank talked a little bit about like birth and whatnot. I think that's where Stan got some of this idea from. But actually adding on, and I mean, this is very significant that the birth process and what could be happening in the womb is actually influencing the baby later on, and also influencing our behavior and our psychology in a sense. And so, that's a totally new idea. I think looking at what's going on in infancy and just, as a person, you're born this blank slate and then you start accumulating your psychopathology, if you want to use that term, versus actually starting to accumulate it and have experiences within the womb. And, now we're looking at all this perinatal research and it's like, the baby's starting to learn language in the womb and all this stuff, where before it was like, oh, the fetus is not conscious and it's not doing anything. We're born a blank slate, then we learn. And so I think Stan really brought in this idea of, no, there's things going on here. And in the LSD sessions that he conducted, it's like people are reliving some of this stuff and then matching the experiences up and validating it and saying this happened, right? Like I remember reading one of his books, and he had this story of somebody saying, oh, I feel like I'm in the womb of my mother and I hear carnival music. And Stan's like, well, that's interesting. So went back to the mother and said, where were you before you had your son? She's like, well, I was at the carnival before my water broke, and it's like, what's going on there? Is that real? Are people making this stuff up in these states of consciousness? And I think being able to validate, we're learning and growing in the womb, and these experiences are also possibly impacting us and influencing us later on in life.
Right. I mean, we've been thinking about that, and we've been taking the tiny human to see good music.
Awesome.
We took her to see Amma, the hugging saint. He was very, very happy. Amma loves babies. She's a mother goddess, right? She loves the babies, and rubbed her belly and stuff like that. And that was kind of cool. And we do try to talk to it and read it, and read to him and things like that. And actually, when we were on a silent retreat this week, my wife got a little concerned that, the baby wasn't hearing anything. So she took a break and talked to the baby for a little while. She's like, it's okay. We're still here. Everything's cool. We're just hanging out in nature. And it seemed to satisfy the small child.
Yeah.
And so, what this also makes me think of is, integration circle, psychedelic experience as really reparenting and re-nurturing us. It's if we're all sort of coming in having been deprived of love at an essential stage in our development, it's then the question is who owes it to who?
Right.
Who is responsible for each other, for another's heart? Yeah. And on one level, maybe nobody is responsible for anybody else, or maybe everybody's responsible for everybody, and that's more of like the bodhisattva path. Right. Like if we want to be, if we want to be holy people, right? If we believe that our psychedelic work is in some way holy, even in recreational settings, right? Like I do know people who, they only want, I know people who only want to do things in therapeutic settings. And I know people who only want to do things in ceremonial settings that are close to the way indigenous people did them. And I know people who have very holy and sacred experiences at parties or small gatherings that don't have much of a container in a traditional way. But we're still learning that, we want to connect to each other in deeper ways. And we still, we start to see that's one of the dubious, I think that one of the dubious benefits of psychedelics is being able to see your friend's deep core wounds.
Yeah, I had this thought a while ago, especially with like recreational use. Well, actually, when we were down in Jamaica, somebody came up to me and I was like, "Oh, how's it going?" And they're like, "I feel like I've processed a lot of this stuff already, and I'm at the age where I just want to be happy and connect with people." And it hit me right then and there. I was like, some people use these in kind of these recreational settings to connect, and who says that's not healing, right? In a culture that might be really disconnected and lacking authentic connection, to be able to do this and really connect with somebody on a deeper level, I mean, that's so healing in itself. And to be heard or witnessed, to be able to share your story with somebody on a very deep level. Yeah, who says that's not kind of therapeutic, right?
Right. And then the question is how much deep connection can you actually stand?
Right.
Like, how much deep connection can you offer and can you accept before you tweak out?
That's a good counterpoint there. Yeah, that's for sure. Because deep connection can really drive you nuts or scare you away, right?
And then the thing is that how do I connect deeply without glomming on a whole bunch of my own codependent crap?
Yeah.
Right? Because it can go from like real kind of selfless and present, and on a dime, it can turn into like, oh, how can you fulfill my infantile needs?
Right.
Like on a, quick. And, I've been in those spaces where it almost modulates, you almost have to calibrate your heart. Like, what is it like to calibrate your heart and to recognize when you go into lust or greed or fear and then back to love?
Yeah.
And on one level, that's kind of okay, because we can make ourselves nutty about like not being saints.
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm supposed to be a saint. I'm only supposed to be selfless. I'm not supposed to have any desires. I'm just supposed to be a bodhisattva that's loving and caring for one another. And that's not usually the way it is, for people who live in the world. And people who live in the world require a certain amount of desire, right? And they require a certain amount of ambition and a certain amount of like guardedness and fear. And like all of that helps us to function in a society to some degree.
Right.
We don't live in monasteries, which of course have their own psychic problems. But it's like, how do we be kind to others and kind to ourselves at the same time, for not being the perfect idealized versions of ourselves that someone told us we maybe should be?
Right.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
It's such a interesting conversation. Just this, yeah, there are a lot of things going on in my head. And I almost kind of want to come back to this point about the reparenting and the integration circles. That's just like a really interesting concept. Like, are you doing any of that work, or is this something new that you're formulating, kind of thinking about like what integration is? And
well, so as a yoga teacher for 20 years or so, there is the same sort of kind of projection that they talk about in psychology. It's like you do, and you have people who you're in some sort of position of authority, like it or not, and people are looking up to you, or however they're looking at you. Excuse me, whether you like it or not. And there's some sense of, we have to care for people as they're growing, because yoga practice is a deep, it's not just physical poses, right? We learn that pretty quick, even if it just is happening in the context of we're doing triangle pose, right? There's a lot more at play there. And especially if you're developing a relationship with these people, there are times when you are kind of reparenting adults in some ways, and letting them be good enough and setting them up for success, and, you know, correcting them without upsetting them, and things of that nature. And so it's not lost on me that when people come to these things, even if I tell them that they're peer-led, right? This is a peer-led circle. Everybody's the expert of their own experience. There seems to be, you know, if there's anybody that seems like they have an authority, people start to kind of look at it. You know, look at them, and am I doing this right?
Right.
And so how you know, the how of, you know, the methodology of just, you know, caring for people in that way, right, is big, and certainly is kind of a never-ending growth process. But I think it's a good one. And I think that it would be useful for most people to be in that position, right, where you are sort of working to care for people. Like, caring for people is generally a good thing to practice. Being that in our society, one of the greatest problems is self-centeredness, right? And one of the greatest, it's just one of the greatest ego things, right? That's what the ego does, right? The ego is I am the center of the universe, and my problems are the most important problems, right, and things of that nature. Because one of my teachers used the examples of, you know, just think about money, right? And money, you've got all these various ideas about money and the good points and the bad points, and you can kind of philosophize about it. Now check this out, my money,
right?
Right? It's a whole different world when we start putting the I into it. And so what he challenges is that money is not the problem. My is the problem.
Yeah. And
so we are so focused on the my, and we're so wrapped up in the I, me, mine. I believe that, you know, John Lennon was no dummy.
Right.
Right. And so an integration circle is about we, you know, it's about you. The nice thing about it is I'm sharing my story for about 7 minutes, and maybe I'm doing another 5 minutes of feedback, right? That leaves 120 minus 12 where I'm listening,
right,
to somebody else, and turning my attention away from my self-centered, self-important nonsense onto somebody else for once in my life.
And that takes a lot of energy for some people, right?
Yeah. Right, because they just sit there and think and choreograph what they're going to share. And on one level, choreography is useful. It's a useful skill. I don't denigrate choreography, but so is listening. Yeah.
Well, it takes, I think, a little bit more energy to listen at times, to really sit with yourself, sit with like anything that's coming up for you, and to really be present with somebody and their experience. I mean, it takes a lot, you know, because there's parts of yourself that be like, oh, I really want to just like share this, or like I want to like dominate the conversation, or this or that, but just to like actually sit there and be present. Sometimes it takes a little bit more energy psychically.
Well, I would challenge that it takes a bit more energy because of our patterning.
Right.
The yogis have a word called samskara, which is a subtle tendency of the mind. Right? It's a habituated pattern, and the metaphor they use is sort of like an eroded river. Right? The river is generally trying to flow towards the ocean, but through some whatever mistake of geology, there's this little rivulet, and the water flows out to nowhere. And so our mind, our focused attentive mind, is like that pure river that's flowing to the ocean, right? Flowing to God, oneness, universe. And then the tendency to prove that I exist is a rivulet, is an eroded rivulet. The tendency to prove that I'm right and smart, right? You know, that I have something to say about this. right, are these little rivulets. And so we have been conditioned to concept the pen is mightier than the sword, right? Is that I have got to kind of win and prove and express and explain. And so all of the energy and the ego promotes that, right? Because the ego's job is to maintain its existence, right? And so it's like, I'm going to prove my existence by saying things and choreographing what I'm going to say. And it takes energy to tame that horse, to switch metaphors in midstream. Right. So we're habituated to proving our points and expressing our points. We are not habituated to honoring the experience of other people.
And do you think that is more because we live in this like individualistic culture versus more like a collective communal culture? Do you think it might be a little bit different if we were more collectively minded?
That would be conjecture for sure.
Yeah.
But it would be my sense that, in this book, the continuum concept, the tribe that she discusses, it's probably different. Because because those people, to take it back, am I trying to prove that I exist in order to get the love that I need? Right? Is this coming from a place of lack where it's like, I'm not important enough to be held and loved? Right? Like if I feel held and loved deeply at my core, that there's a sense of rightness about me because the design of my being was honored and I was, held and cared for the way that I was supposed to. Like, would I still need to do that? To what extent are our personalities? That's one of the things she says is what we call personalities are basically just maladaptive behavior patterns.
Right. Yeah, which you probably learn early on for safety and survival of like, I'm not getting this. How am I going to try to get that now? Yeah. I mean, attachment theory in itself is just really interesting. And I've been trying to think about it a little bit more. I remember writing a paper about indigenous rites of passages, and there was a section on it that I wrote. And I think I might actually have part of this paper on the website somewhere, so if anybody wants to check it out, I don't know where it is, but I'll put it in the show notes if I find it. But talking about the attachment, how attachment in indigenous cultures might be a little bit different than ours, and thinking that too much love and nurturing is going to really be bad for the baby. And on the flip side, from this research, they suggested that it was actually more beneficial. And, they actually don't become so clingy and codependent. They actually learn how to grow and, not be so, because I think our belief is if we give them that much and coddle them too much, it just becomes so dependent. But on the flip side, from what this researcher is saying, it was the total opposite, and they're actually more psychologically developed in a sense. And I think they even went as so far as to say that compared to people back then, we're childish adults is the language that they use, because we're not meeting some of these attachment schemes, I guess, nowadays. And it's interesting, I've definitely seen that even working with teenagers and stuff. I used to work in a residential home with a lot of suicidal teens, and some of them coming in just being I'm so bored, my parents work all the time, they don't have time for me. And it's ooh, that's so heartbreaking, right? No wonder why you're probably really dwelling in a lot of this stuff. And that seems pretty typical nowadays in our culture, working all the time, trying to just make ends meet. There's kind of this lack of connection and nourishment at times. That's a generalization, but
And this that boredom, we sort of have you ever had anybody tell you, if you're bored, you're not bored, you're boring?
Right. Yeah. I've heard that.
That's not true. It's that's something you tell somebody that you're training to do monotonous labor.
Yeah.
That they don't want to do. Well, here, and when we're talking about that, but anyway, have you ever really needed a hug?
Yeah.
Why aren't you still hugging?
Right.
Because you got what you needed from it. You really needed a hug, and somebody was there, and they loved you, and they gave you what you needed, and you felt satisfied, and you let go.
Right.
Like, why would that be different with babies?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If like we know we have developmental stages.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, why would it not, if a baby, just like if it's a developmental stage, that the baby is designed to be held. Right? If you look at and like no other animal in nature really has cribs.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's like, why wouldn't the baby just develop? It's like, okay, cool. Like I have they have legs.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to hold on forever. Like at some point they're going to crawl and walk.
Right.
It's absurd to think that to assume that like the baby is poorly designed and antisocial. That's the other word. It's like we're assuming that the thing is bad and manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
This is absurd. One of the stories in the book, one of the tribesmen invented a playpen. They had never seen one before, but this guy, his child, started to walk, and I guess he was like, "I really should make a playpen for this thing, right? This is a lot. It's walking now." And so he, spent the whole day like hacking down, branches and thatching them together, and he made a playpen. And he put the child in the playpen, and it stood up, and it held onto it, and it sort of started to walk around it. And when he realized that he was trapped in a cage, he started to wail. Mm. And the woman said, it's the kind of wail you hear in America all the time,
right?
But you never heard in the village before.
Huh.
Right? Nobody like the babies would cry, but nobody would wail in like terror and like, with just sort of like, the way you would wail if you were in jail.
Right.
Right. And
like, get me out of here. What am I doing in here?
This sucks, And so you know what the tribesman did?
What?
He took the baby out of the playpen and he chopped it to bits and threw it in the fire.
Nice.
He was like, this was obviously a bad idea.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to create something that creates this much distress for my offspring.
Right. Well, it makes me think too about like addictions and different, like defense mechanisms and whatnot is like self-soothing, right? It's like we're really kind of instead of going in and giving that nourishment to the baby, it's like we're trying to really let them self-soothe themselves. And I think sometimes when you think about like addiction and stuff like that, it's almost like a self-soothing pattern, right? We're trying to just self-medicate at times, and
which probably leads to like the instant gratification. Like, how do I get the maximum amount of pleasure and comfort with the least amount of effort? Which is also why it's really important to introduce a meditation practice into a psychedelic practice. Because there can be that tendency to be like, and you see it come up as people, I read Michael Pollan's book, Can You Give Me Drugs?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, I'm suffering, I'm in a lot of pain, and I need a fix now. And that type of use is also kind of representative of the same issue.
Right.
Because we do know, and it's not a bad step, but we know that even the quick fixes aren't that quick and not that fixing.
Right. Yeah, there's still a lot of work to do afterwards. Maybe you get that really nice high and euphoria, and you're like, oh yeah, I figured it out. But yeah, there's a lot of work to continue to do afterwards.
To not mess up your fresh powder.
Yeah.
Right. That's the metaphor they use, right? It's that the psychedelics can give you your mountain some fresh powder with free of the tracks. You're still you got to track it up one way or another.
Yeah. When I was younger, I'd never like to step on the yard when it snowed because I just love the fresh powder and without the tracks. I'm like, oh, it's too perfect to mess up.
Whereas I jumped right in.
Yeah.
Which is probably just two different maladaptive patterns.
Yeah. I think I was just really attracted to the aesthetics of it, like just fluff. Right. You just remind me of that. But, people are probably like, why are we talking about like attachment and birth and connection and stuff like that? And, it's really interesting because this stuff does come up in psychedelic sessions, and also like we see it a lot in breathwork sessions. For example, when you said something about wanting a hug, I'm thinking about also some things that come up in breath work where somebody has already felt abandonment and they're so afraid to reach out. And like in the body work type of work that we do, holding hands and giving somebody like a hug can be part of body work. And it's like giving them something that they might have missed in their childhood. And for some people, that's so hard. Like it takes so much courage to be like, I'm in pain right now, and I need to ask you for your hand. There's been so many times in breathwork sessions where like I see some of that and I'm like, hey, do you need anything? And somebody's like dancing on the edge of like, can you hold me? And they don't know how to say it because maybe that's never been met before. And so I think having this conversation is just really helpful for even understanding these experiences and maybe even how to work with them a little bit.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I hope, I do some inner child rescue work as well. And it is really interesting that people don't feel like they're allowed to even, they've resigned. And this is what they see in the babies, is that the babies will cry into an endless void because they don't understand time in the same way.
Right.
Just like we know that in breath work and psychedelic sessions, time is distorted. And so it's sort of like we're crying into an endless void of an eternal now.
Right.
And the idea of asking for help, and this deprivation, right? We've been resigned to it, right? There's this process. You watch it, the baby is screaming, and then at some point it gives up. And that is not a trained baby. Right, that is a resigned baby, somebody like a being that has decided, I guess I just live without love.
Right.
And so it's like we're walking around like, I guess I just live without love. And if I ask someone to hold my hand, then it's a sign of weakness.
Right.
Or I'm going to get shamed for it, or I'm going to get yelled at,
rejected.
Or all of these things, which is absurd. Or even like, and then in the most horrible cases, I'm going to get used and abused.
Yeah.
Right. In really, really, terrible abuse cases, right? That kind of stuff happens. And so, a psychedelic community, and which of course is, in the psychedelic community, is dealing with issues of abuse all over the place.
Joe and I actually just had a conversation about this this morning. I don't know. Do you have any opinions on how to deal with some of this stuff? Because it's tricky, right? Like, on one end, it's like people really want to try to report it, and I think they should. But then it's like this balance of like, I was engaging in an underground community, taking a drug with somebody, and they abused me. So they might be admitting to engaging in that type of activity, and are they putting themselves at trouble? But I mean, this is, and I wrote down on my notepad, like shadow work. And, Joe and I were actually talking about this today. It was like, this is a huge shadow piece, I think, within the community, is dealing with some of this abuse that's happening, and how are we supporting victims and encouraging people to seek help or seek some sort of support, because it happens. And, there's reports about it. And I think the community as a whole is like, what to do, right?
Yeah. And I certainly don't have answers on that.
No.
I was at the Queering Psychedelics conference last month, and there was a woman there. I believe I believe she identified as a woman, which you can't say about everybody at the Queering Psychedelics conference, right? It's not as obvious as that. But from the audience, and she was saying that if we kick these people out of the community somewhere else, and so how do we create some sort of process, like some sort of reconciliation and healing process within our community that doesn't just cut, you can't cut people out like a cancer if you there's nowhere else for them to go. Right. It's one blue marble. And it was really interesting. There was a guy named, do you know who Reed Mahalko is?
I don't think so.
Reed Mahalko is a like a sex therapist.
Okay.
He actually showed up at my yoga. We hosted him at my yoga studio back in like 2006 or something. He was doing something called cuddle parties. He invented the cuddle party, which is easily searchable. But he was confronted for sexual misconduct and went through a very public and then owned it, right? Owned it and went through a very public healing process, reconciliation process, and confrontation process that he didn't run. That took into account the feelings and opinions of the people who felt that they were wronged by him. And, you know, did work and looked at himself and allowed himself to be confronted and allowed himself to be called out and did what he needed to do in front of everybody. And so it's like, to what extent, like who's willing to do all of that work?
Right.
Like, because like I don't see, to be quite honest, like Goldsmith isn't doing that. You know, and I'll just throw him out. I'll throw him under the bus because it's not news.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty public.
But it's like, you know, Goldsmith is not going through a public reconciliation process that's taking into account the feelings and opinions of the people who believe they were wronged by him. Right. There's a weird email thread going around, you know, that people are chiming in on that I've glanced at once, and there's no real anything happening there, I don't think.
Yeah.
But you know, how do we do that in such a way that recognizes that, you know, on one level, we're all victims of trauma.
Yeah.
Right. It's like a, you know, barring sociopathy or psychopathy, right? And maybe even not, you know, assuming that somebody's not a psychopath, that they are actually as screwed up by this whole system as everybody else. And yet that they are still the perpetrator of some heinous acts. It's like, what do you do with all of that?
Yeah.
And who is strong enough to hold the space for that?
Yeah. These are big questions. And like you said, I don't know the answer. And I mean, it's interesting kind of coming from why are people doing this, and then kind of coming from that trauma background. And if anybody reads some of Stan's work with, you know, some of his case reports and whatnot, you know, tying it into like the perinatal matrices, right? Like there can be like these weird type of like sexual desires and whatnot tied to possible type of birth experience. Not to like say, oh, this is exactly why, but you know, just this idea that, you know, people are traumatized, and traumatized people traumatize other people in a sense, you know, kind of perpetuating that, maybe not healing it completely, and kind of continuing those actions, right? Because it's like that inner child that's still hurt, that's you know, just hasn't resolved itself. And yeah, there definitely are people that maybe that's not the case, and yeah, maybe there should be other sorts of, I don't know, penalties or whatnot. But
can we agree that like that two heteronormative white guys like have spoken enough on this subject for now?
Yep.
Cool. And maybe what if we wrap about the Psilocybin Summit for a couple of minutes?
Let's chat about that.
Thanks for entertaining the pitch.
Well, yeah, no, it is a hard conversation to have with with
just us.
Yep.
But you know, it'd be my thought that if you got a couple of diverse voices on this podcast to talk about it, that'd probably be really valuable for people.
We are exploring a possible event that might cover a lot of shadow aspects, so stay tuned for that. And I'm sure that will be a topic, and it won't be, hopefully two white guys talking about this stuff and get other people involved to really get that out, get the information out there.
Right. From the
Psilocybin Summit. Let's dive in.
Which is also not to say that white guys can't be victims of sexual assault.
Right. Well,
but that's and scene.
Well, also, well, I guess I'll take the accountability factor of like, how could we encourage maybe people that are, abusing people to like take stand and reflect on themselves. How could us as white men try to, I don't know, be in that role of leadership?
One of the things I'm really curious about, actually, is the mindfulness of enthusiasm. Right? So kind of like we were talking about listening to others, there's this concept going around right now called enthusiastic consent. It's like where it's not just like, where it's like you can sometimes press somebody into giving you consent.
Right.
But it's the idea of a hell yes. Is it a hell yes? And so it's like, are you gauging somebody's body language and their tonality and the way they respond to you? It's like, are they enthusiastic about engaging with you?
Yeah.
And if they're not, just don't.
Right. Yeah. If they're not 100%, 110%, then maybe that's a no. Maybe they just don't know how to say no. Yeah.
So just gauge enthusiasm.
Yeah. All right. Psilocybin Summit. What's going on with that?
Psilocybin Summit. I was inspired by the work of the 920 Coalition, which is sort of doing for psilocybin what 420 is doing for cannabis. Although, exploring beyond just kind of what seems to be recreational. 420 is in large part a big party. Hopefully, the 920 Coalition, we're trying to put forward, a little bit more thoughtful conversations about, use and the healing potentials and traditional aspects. And so kind of inspired by that, I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to do an online conference? There's never been really a conference that was just psilocybin.
Right. I don't think so. No.
And then what would it be like to do that online, live, using software like Zoom so that people could interact and ask questions and be able to be involved instead of just having it all just laid at their feet, just thrown at them. That people could actually talk to the people they want to talk to and not necessarily have to travel halfway around the world to get to a conference, and spend, a lot of money on tickets because there's a venue to pay for.
Right.
Right. It's like the Zoom at the level we're using it is not free, but it's not a Marriott.
Right.
So we can keep the cost super low. And also we can have people there. I think we have people Skyping in Zooming in from 4 or 5 countries.
Awesome.
So, folks who have very busy schedules who are like, ordinarily it'd be like, if I need you in Tulsa, can you be in Tulsa for the Psilocybin Summit, on September 20th? And they're like, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to be in France. It's like, okay, it's cool. Like, talk to us about Mazatec tradition and ritual from France. And so that's one of the things also we're super proud about is, I'm working really hard to get as much indigenous and traditional representation as possible.
Awesome.
Like, how do we, like all of Saturday afternoon is conversations about, the Mesoamerican use, in the Mazatec area in Oaxaca, and the various syncretisms with the mushrooms and like the Catholic tradition, and what is it like for the indigenous use that's not syncretic with Catholicism, and how are these things being used in that sort of way, and having people who are from Mexico talk about it, right? It's like we've got a couple Americans who have spent a significant amount of time there, and then we also have people who are from Mexico.
Yeah.
From some from the cities and some from the countries, and that feels really good. And it's even made me think that we need a 5-year plan where the thing about like these villages in Oaxaca is that the internet's not great.
Right.
So the internet's not great, and we are limited by that, and that some of the people that we would like to have on there don't actually have access to internet. Yeah. So, in 5 years, we'll figure that out. And won't that be cool? And then we'll also, have time to put into place, well, who are the translators? Do we need to translate from Mazatec to Spanish to English?
Right.
Like, do we need that level of communication? Communication technology and those sorts of things. There's also, some scientists and researchers. Alan Davis, for example, is going to be talking about his work.
Awesome.
At Johns Hopkins, for folks who are very much into science. And then folks like, do you know Sierra Sherlock?
I don't think so.
Very active in the UK Psychedelic Society, very active in Psychedelic Society of Ireland. She's in Ireland.
Oh, awesome.
And, she has been facilitating, truffles retreats in Amsterdam for many years. And so she's going to be talking about like, what is it like to facilitate powerful experiences?
Yeah.
So there's almost like professional level training there, like for people who are like, oh, it's like, what is it like? Like if I'm going to be holding space for people, how do I build a container and how do I hold the space and things like that. A couple of cultivation labs. There's a guy named James McConchie who just opened the Haight Street Shroom Shop. And he's doing, labs on cultivation. And so he's going to be doing an in-person lab, so people who are in the Bay can come to that.
Oh, cool.
And then that will be streamed.
Live stream. Oh, awesome.
And things like that. And I could go on and on. Like, everybody's awesome.
You have a huge lineup, and it keeps building every time I check it out, it seems like. How many presenters do you have?
20.
20? That's awesome.
Well, the thing is I'm not renting a Marriott.
Right.
So whenever I just get too many people, I just add a day. So we just added Thursday. And the only person on Thursday right now is Tom Hastis, who's really fun. Has he been on your show?
Yeah, Joe facilitated a debate between him and Dr. Jerry Brown on the.
Oh, you did that already. I was thinking about doing that.
Yeah, the Christmas debate, or.
How did it go?
It went well. It was interesting. I think it might have been a tie. I don't remember. So I wasn't there, but I did listen to the episode. I don't remember. If you're curious, go check it out.
Right, because Jerry just emailed me, and I was thinking about, it's like who do you put first? Like if they have their own sessions, like who do you put first? Do you put them on a panel? That kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, they are both. One of them, for those of you who don't know, one of them believes that Jesus was a mushroom, and one of them doesn't.
Yeah.
Right, and Tom has sort of a pagan Wiccan background. Mm-hmm. And so he's very much into sort of like earth magic and that sort of thing, and has, kind of tried to show through his work that the things people think are mushroom references in Christianity are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wants to kind of do away with that myth or that story or narrative.
Right. So yeah, man, we're just going to keep as long as I keep finding people who are geniuses, I'm going to keep adding days.
Awesome. So it's just ever growing. if at one point we'll probably, if I have to fill out Monday, we're done. Yeah. Okay.
That's our stretch goal, is Monday. But also interesting people are coming out of the woodwork. There's a psychiatric nurse reached out named CJ Spotwood. He's up in Maine. And so he's worked in, psychiatric emergency rooms, and so what he's going to talk about is managing worst case scenarios.
Awesome.
Because that's one of the things that we hear when we start talking about, all these retreats are popping up, and people are taking psilocybin in groups, and the question is, we know that it's mostly safe. But that things can happen. Yeah. And what is that? And I don't know what that means. I have no idea what's a bad thing that can happen other than, it's like, but people can be physically at risk. Rarely, but still. So we got CJ to talk about it, which I think is really, really important. Yeah. I would never want I would never want psychedelic education to only come from psychiatric nurses.
Right.
Right. And the thing is, that's how it's often taught, with things like PCP, for example. Mm-hmm. Like you only hear about the horror stories of PCP. But according to our mutual friend, Raquel Bennett, like there are some lovely, there's a range, because PCP is related to ketamine.
Right. Yeah.
Chemically.
Yeah. Yep.
It's just spicy ketamine.
Yeah. Just really interesting.
And so there is definitely a range where it is potentially very therapeutic, right? And it's not even small. It's not like an M-bomb where there's like a small happy dose and then trouble, right? There's apparently so, but I don't know a lot about it. But the thing is, if you only have psychiatric nurses telling you about
superhuman strength people coming in and acting all crazy on PCP.
Right. It would be like talking to an osteopath to try and learn about skiing.
Right.
Right. The guy who only sees the problems.
Yep.
Right. There's a lot about skiing other than injuries.
I think actually one of the first talks I saw by Hamilton Morris was at the first symposia event. And I believe he was going over like his interest and passion in PCP and other derivatives like that. And yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And I always kind of like his concept of drugs. Like drugs aren't really necessarily harmful. It's like kind of how we're using them. They're just molecules and substances. And, there's potential risks and benefits. And it just depends how they're used, right?
Right.
A poison can be a medicine and a medicine can be a poison.
Right. And that is, definitely one of the reasons why education is important, right? And also kind of responsible modeling.
Yeah.
Right. And sort of responsible, kind of responsible mentorship and education, as like, you can kind of see there's starting to be gray in my beard. What does that even mean?
You're developing wisdom. You have wisdom to share.
I guess. I mean, hopefully a little bit of it's mixed in there somewhere. Yeah. But I was at a gathering in the city and with some guy who I just sort of assumed was my age. And he was like, yeah, man, this is what we need. We need elders like you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he was like you. I was like, how old are you? He's like, 22. I was like, oh. I was like, okay.
You're like, no, I'm not that old.
I was like, okay, guy. Sweet guy, but yeah, so that's kind of what, I'm hoping that, this conference can provide is just a lot more access to a lot more wisdom in a way that is participatory.
Mm-hmm. So why is education important to you? Why does psychedelic education matter to you?
Well, I think we just covered. I mean, we didn't cover that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess we did.
I don't have more of an answer for that.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually not. Well, the thing is, I don't know if I said this. I'm not actually advocating psychedelics.
Right.
I'm advocating meditation for people who use psychedelics. Did you hear the story about like the two guys that used to go down by the river and meditate and smoke cigarettes?
No.
There were these two friends and they would go to the river and meditate and smoke cigarettes until one of them said, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Like, maybe is this like disrespectful that like, we're smoking cigarettes and stuff? And the other one goes, I don't know. We should like email our guru. As modern times. And so they came back. They're like, yeah, let's do that. And they came back to meet the next week. And one of them pulled out a pack of smokes and the other one didn't. And they were like, well, what's going on? And they pulled up their phones and they looked at their emails. And one of them said, is it okay if I smoke while I meditate? And the guru said, no, you shouldn't ever smoke. It's like, don't smoke while you're don't ruin your meditation. Like with smoking, that's gross.
Right.
And the other guy pulled out his phone and said, is it okay if I meditate while smoking? And the guru said, yes, you should always meditate. How do we grow? What is it like to grow in wisdom and grow in heart? Like, that's what I want to know. It's like, how do we grow ourselves so that we are like pulling as much grace and love down into the world as possible. Like, that was the question that the medicine posed to me all those years ago, and it's a question I'm still trying to answer.
Yeah, it's an important question, and I think
so
really a huge part of integration, right? How are we showing up, and being able to live with love and grace and gratitude. It's huge, and be in the present moment.
Right. And so the education hopefully is not like, I'm not trying to create, like, if you look at the curation of the speakers, it's not just facts. Like, I'm not trying to fill your head with facts. There's facts and science and things like that there too. But like, hopefully this is like whole being, heart, mind education that makes people feel like there's something possible for their lives that is greater, that psilocybin may or may not play a part in.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. You say that you're really encouraging meditation versus psychedelics, and I'm sure you get a lot of emails saying, like, I mean, you mentioned it, read Michael Pollan's, where can I get psilocybin? Where can I really engage in this work? And it's like, is this stuff right for everybody? And I would think the answer is no, right? It's not. I don't think it is for everybody. And are there other techniques out there that can help get us to these states of being? And I guess like, what's really the end goal here, right? Like, psychedelics, meditation, all these other tools to induce like non-ordinary states, it seems, I think, okay to generalize that, there's this sense of that we want to be in the present. We want to be a little bit more connected with ourselves. If you looked at the study with psilocybin in nature, being connected back with nature in a sense, and just living a good life. And, psilocybin can be part of that, but I think there's also other roads.
Right. And so one of my big joys really is working with healthy people. I'm not a therapist. I mean, we did a lot of, we sort of waxed philosophical about a lot of psychological things, but, at the end of the day, my work is like, I'm trained as a coach,
right?
Trained as a meditation teacher. I'm trained as a coach. And I think that for healthy people, that are not, and by healthy, I just mean kind of not struggling with sort of deep psychological or mental health issues, right? Sometimes, coaching, and whether that has psilocybin or other medicines involved or not, can be of almost greater benefit, right? Like I don't know, I might be going off on a tangent, but I have a client. She was doing therapy for a while and was not really getting anywhere. And she decided to give coaching a shot. And 2 months into it, she's got a new job.
Wow.
With more responsibility, more leadership in a culture that's less toxic, and in a way that is like more appropriate for her to kind of live her life and be, expressive in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And what we had is that this is not a woman who needs mental health care. This is a woman that needs strategy and accountability, right? And someone to believe in her, right? And to point out that, like, okay, you have anxiety at work that you've told me is toxic. I saw pictures of you on Facebook at the beach last week. Did you have anxiety at the beach? No. Do you have anxiety at Whole Foods? No. How are you with your kids? Pretty good. Okay. Let's get you out of it. Like, get out of that job. Right? It's like, you're not the problem. Like, you're not like, how do we take context into place? It's like, we live in a world that is not looking out for us, right? She was in a corporate culture that did not care about her, right? She was not the problem, right? And sometimes, like, and if we're not, like how deep do we need to look at ourselves versus to what extent do we need to kind of just take the massive action to do the things we know we need to do? so we're not fermenting in our own inaction and fear.
Yeah.
Because that'll make us sick.
Yeah. And this has come up a bunch, just in the integration process, and thinking about coaching. If somebody maybe wanting to leave a job, but maybe not being in the right place to do that, right? Like, how do we make those big changes when maybe we're not in a state to do that?
Well, sustainability is huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I think it's important to coach people on, is because they maybe come out of a psychedelic vision and they're like, everything needs to change.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, like, what if we apply for new jobs before we quit the one we have?
Yeah.
What if you just donate $50 to MAPS instead of all of your money?
Right.
That was a good conversation I had with a guy who came off like a big, powerful thing. It was like, I want to liquidate my assets, give it all to MAPS. And then we talked about sustainability. Well, what is like, it's like, can you give him $5,000? This is a tech guy. He was doing pretty well. Like, he could give MAPS $5,000 a year and he'd feel good about that. It wouldn't ruin his life.
Right.
It's like, what is an appropriate, what is sane, appropriate, sustainable action look like?
It's a good point. Yeah.
As opposed to like, all of a sudden I'm Jesus and like, it's like, no, you've got 60 more years on the planet, bro. Get it together.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're over time. An hour always goes pretty quick. So,
right.
Anything you want to close with? How can people find out about Psilocybin Summit, Tam Integration?
Well, the thing about Psilocybin Summit is that if they go to psilocybinsummit.com/Psy today, they'll get 10% off.
Awesome.
And Psychedelics Today will get a kickback.
So if you're interested, psilocybinsummit.com/Psy today. That'd be awesome.
And then Tam Integration is my integration website. And if somebody feels like they want to talk to me for like an hour a week, then that's available to them.
Cool. And your kind of focus is more in the coaching with meditation?
Yeah. I have a deep meditation background.
Mm-hmm.
I got to work, my coaching training was through a school called presence-based coaching, mm-hmm. which also had a deep kind of mindfulness and somatic bent, but also uses kind of modern coaching technology, mm-hmm. And is pretty effective for things both in and out of the integrative world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And I think we mentioned it, but you mentioned the 9/20 coalition. So the Psilocybin Summit is around 9/20. That's correct. I don't think we mentioned the date.
It's September 20th to the 22nd. Actually, now it's September 19th to the 22nd.
Starting a day early. Awesome.
And might even, check back in. It might end up running till the 23rd.
Cool. Awesome. So again, everybody, if you want to check out the Psilocybin Summit, psilocybinsummit.com/Psy today. Get a little discount, and it also helps us out as well. Anything you want to close with? Any last words of wisdom or anything that you want to share before we wrap up here?
You're loved, and you are loving. There you go. That's all I got.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks so much, Daniel. Really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and we'll talk soon.
Right back at you. Thanks so much.
All right, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Daniel Shankin from Tam Integration. And as a reminder, definitely check out the upcoming Psilocybin Summit, September 19th to the 22nd. You can learn more information at psilocybinsummit.com/Psy today. And if you enjoy what we're doing here over at Psychedelics Today, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And leave a review. We'd really appreciate any reviews on iTunes or Facebook. It just really helps get the word out there. And we just really also want to hear what people think about our show. We would appreciate any of those reviews if you're feeling called to do that. And a really awesome way to help us here at Psychedelics Today is to share any content. If there's a podcast, anything that you find on Instagram, reposting it, sharing it with your friends, colleagues, family, whoever, just being able to share that message, get it out there, really helps us a lot. So we appreciate all of our listeners and our supporters. And if you're already sharing our stuff, thank you so much. It really helps us out. And if you want to, donate, we have a couple options through Patreon. So patreon.com/psychedelics today, or you could just type in Psychedelics Today and Patreon. And we also have a donate page, Psychedelics Today/donate. And, also be sure to check out some of our online courses. We have some free courses up on our Teachable site, so psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. There's 8 common mistakes, and then also a free webinar on spiritual emergence or psychosis. And if you're feeling called to dig a little bit deeper into psychedelic education and training, we have our Navigating Psychedelics course. So we have some upcoming live cohorts that I'm sure will be continuing throughout the year. So if you miss an upcoming course in the fall, be sure to just check out what we're offering. Sign up for our email newsletter. We'll keep you up to date. And so those are some ways to support the show. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. And again, thanks so much for supporting us, for listening to the show. We couldn't be doing this without you. So again, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.